There is a Qur'anic keyword, Fahisha, that I think has much to teach us in the West today about how to live well and live lives pleasing to God. And to help unpack this a bit, I'm going to read a few words from Qur'anic Keywords, a reference guide by Abdul Rashid Siddiqui. And he writes, Al-Fahisha is the Quranic term for obscenity and indecency. It means everything that exceeds its limit. However, it is mainly associated with sexual immorality and those acts that human beings instinctively find repulsive. And I guess that connects with the idea of the fitra, this innate sense of right and wrong that we have as part of our species. Such vices include adultery, fornication, homosexuality, nudity, and pornography, or any other obscene act. And our author unpacks this in an analysis here. He says the Quran enjoins Muslims to refrain from all the immoral and indecent acts, whether open or secret. And he references Surah 6, 151 and Surah 7, verse 33. Now, I recommend you look those up. They're quite helpful. Some of the shameful and immoral acts also have legal and social sanctions, as they are offences against society and are universally considered abominable. And when I first read that, I thought that reminds me of somewhere in the Bible, Leviticus chapter 18, actually, where the Lord speaks to Moses, saying, "Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, I am the Lord your God. You shall not do as they do in the land of Egypt where you lived, and you shall not do as they do in the land of Canaan to which I am bringing you." And then there's a whole list of about none of you shall uncover any near next of kin of their nakedness, and lots of other sexual acts and relations which are prohibited. And at the very end of this chapter, Leviticus 18, it says, "So keep my charge not to commit any of these abominations that were done before you, and not to defile yourselves by them. I am the Lord your God." So, and the list there is pretty much the same list as you will find in Islamic law today. So our author continues, "Then there are certain acts in which one may indulge in private, but will feel ashamed if this comes to public knowledge, such as watching pornography or looking at someone with lust, which the Quran describes as treachery of the eyes." Interesting expression. That's Surah 40, verse 19. To save society and oneself from this flood of immodesty and shameful and evil deeds, Allah has endowed human beings with natural modesty, shyness, and bashfulness. It's extraordinary technology, if you like, that God has given to human beings to live well and to live good lives. In Islamic technology, this is called Al-Haya. Al-Haya. And there's actually quite a good article on Wikipedia about this. If you Google H-A-Y-A, there's lots of quotes from Hadith and other Quranic ayah about this subject. In essence, it is a feeling in one's heart that keeps one from indulging in evil deeds that may cause embarrassment. It is very close to what is termed one's moral conscience in Western society. If one has no conscience, one can perform and do whatever one likes without any care for what society may think. Now, in traditional societies, in traditional Western societies, Britain, France, and so on, this moral conscience was very alive and often referred to in literature and so on. Today, that's kind of gone now, and we're flooded with secular individualism and a language of immorality and so on. If one has no conscience, one can perform and do whatever one likes without any care for what society may think. And of course, that is the case now in the West. People talk about their rights to do all sorts of things which, until quite recently, were considered abominable or completely contrary to right living. Conversely, someone with a conscience will feel ashamed to do any evil deed, even if no one is watching. And this sense of shame is particularly associated with Victorian England here in Britain, and is now seen as an outdated and reprehensible idea. But actually, a positive sense of shame is actually intrinsic to moral character and good living, as the author here explains. The Prophet, peace be upon him, emphasized this on many occasions. Haya and Iman are two companions that go together. If one of them is lifted, the other is also lifted. So Haya and Iman is faith, are two companions that go together. If one of them is lifted, the other is also lifted. So they're connected fundamentally. That's a hadith. It is very obvious from this hadith that a person who has no Haya lacks faith as well. In another hadith, the Prophet is reported to have said, Al-Haya is part of Iman. So this sense of shyness, modesty, bashfulness, and it is part of Iman, faith itself. Al-Haya is the first line of defense against obscenity. An extraordinary statement. It safeguards one from committing indecent acts, as our conscience stops us from indulging in vice. Now, obviously, this is a conscience that is working, that is functional, and not one that has been basically obliterated by forces around us or repeated acts of immorality. As the Prophet observed, from the words of the previous prophets that the people still find are, if you feel no shame, then do as you wish. If you feel no shame, do as you wish. Very interesting. And that's in Bukhari. Actually, as a complete side note, I'm reminded of exactly the same statement in the works of St. Augustine, the very eminent Catholic theologian and bishop from the 5th century. We'll let that pass. This means that the importance of an emphasis on modesty has been passed on from earlier prophets. This is the legacy which humanity inherited from time immemorial. So it's part of the legacy we have got from our civilized forebears and how to live well and lives pleasing to God. It means that modesty or shame is the criterion for whether or not one should do something. If one is satisfied that there is no shame in doing something, one should do it. But if there is reason to be ashamed in doing such a thing, then one should refrain. So there we are. I think that's a fascinating discussion, and it points to those traditional values that we so highly prized here in the West, Britain, France, Italy, even in America in years past, which have now basically been obliterated, and now the emphasis is on individual rights and choice. I want to do things, rather than on a sense of shame and avoiding acts which are not pleasing to God and which do us harm. And these good values are found in Islam. Obviously, they're found in traditional Christianity, and they're found in traditional Judaism. And in fact, they're found everywhere, in all civilizations. It's not just the Abrahamic faiths. But these values, these virtues, this teaching, this wisdom is under sustained attack, and indeed has largely been subverted in the world. But in my personal view, the fitra which God has endowed us with, it's part of our DNA as a species, still exists, and if it hasn't been damaged or obliterated, it still speaks to these fundamental truths of our existence. Anyway, till next time.